Story 1. Former boss who acted like everyone's friend to their face but was horrible behind their back. Coworker lost their child and took leave. He complained that another employee had a miscarriage, returned to work immediately, and he did not understand why she was so upset. Story 2. Daniel Snyder, former owner of the Washington football team. I worked on his private jet, a Gulfstream G650. It has a fiber optic carpet that displays a lit-up Washington football team logo. It is beautiful and costs about $80,000 for just the logo part of the carpet. This carpet is a wear item, and the completions manager told me it gets replaced every 60 days. He is difficult to work with. He calls the completions center, demanding people be fired over some delay or minor issue on the jet. One time, a technician scratched the jet skin and needed a repair, and Snyder wanted the technician fired immediately. He just enjoys getting people fired. Story 3. I used to work as a receptionist in a criminal law firm. There was a client who had murdered someone, served his time, and was now facing another murder charge. He was the scariest person I had ever met. He made my blood run cold. His eyes were black. He was very menacing and looked like he wanted to murder me on the spot. Story 4. Barb Pearson was my former supervisor when I worked as a custodial assistant at the University of Minnesota Duluth. She was very difficult to work with. Story 5. My brother had me reported by law enforcement for a false claim that I had a loaded gun and was holding my parents hostage. When my mother died from Alzheimer's, he filed a false police report and had me investigated for murder, even though my father, hospice nurse, and caregiver were all present as I held my mother's hand when she died. Story 6. My friend's son did not want to go to college. My friend expressed her disappointment in this decision. The son responded by brutally murdering her with an axe. He then gave her eulogy and spoke about what a great mother she was before being arrested. Story 7. Gary Hilton, the National Forest serial killer, used to come into the business where I worked. You know how some people have charisma the moment they walk into a room and everyone feels drawn to their positive presence? Gary Hilton had the exact opposite of that. He would get hostile with other customers, with everyone on staff except the owner, and had such darkness in his eyes. We all tried to get him in and out as quickly as possible, but he never caused enough disturbance to get banned or have the police called on him. He struck me as very mentally ill and belligerent, maybe struggling with addiction, but I was still a little surprised by his arrest. He had a dog named Dandy who he absolutely adored, so I assumed that he wasn't violent. Obviously, I was wrong. Story 8. When I was in a mall in 2018, a baby in a stroller started crying, and an old man, whom I would guess was around 80, ran towards the baby, grabbed the stroller with the baby, and attempted to push the stroller down the escalator. The mother could not react quickly enough. Luckily, 2 teenage girls intervened. Story 9. The worst person I ever met was a university hospital volunteer at a well-known children's cancer ward in the 1980s. When I first met him, I had a brother with cancer who was receiving treatment there, and they became fast friends. This man was a graduate student at the world-famous school attached to the hospital. My brother liked this volunteer, and he started visiting my brother at our home. He talked his way into sleeping in my brother's room. I would see them rolling on the floor, but my mom told me to ignore it since this man was an important university person and we were lucky to know him. Later, I caught him molesting my brother, but it was covered up as if this man was being assaulted by my brother and we had to keep it a secret. This went on for about 7 years until my brother succumbed to cancer. Meanwhile, this man became like a talisman connection to my brother and was very close to my parents and extended family. He became a successful technology professional, and his status was totally unimpeachable to my family or anyone else. He was a total psychopath to me anytime we were alone and denigrated me to the rest of the family since I suspected what he was up to. He became the center of my family, and I became estranged from them because I couldn't tolerate being around his evil aura. Fast forward to the first few months of the COVID-19 pandemic, and I received a call from my mom that he was in jail. I immediately said, "He's a pedophile, isn't he?" And he got caught. It turned out he was molesting his best friend's child, and she believed her child and called the police. I contacted the police and told them what had happened growing up. The investigation revealed he had been befriending many young, terminally ill boys with cancer and their families. They found a number of hospital wristbands he kept as souvenirs, including one with my brother's name. Unfortunately, all these children died, so he couldn't be charged for violating them. After a year of investigation, this man took a plea deal and served 1 year at San Quentin State Prison. Story 10. I have met some horrible people but usually have empathy for them because it was obvious they had difficult upbringings. I have always taken pride in my ability to read people and have generally been able to distance myself early on from unpleasant individuals. The worst person I met was a true covert narcissist and most likely a psychopath. I honestly thought of her as a true friend and a good person. I started having anxiety I could not explain, and when bad things happened to me and those around me, I was not able to connect her to them. Once the mask came off and I was able to see her for what she really was and the intentional havoc she caused me, I was deeply disturbed. I now completely understand the phrase "a wolf in sheep's clothing." Story 11. My ex-mother-in-law once wished on her granddaughter that she would get ill, suffer, and die so she could understand what it's like to lose a child. The offense was that her son went low contact. I had nothing to do with it. How my ex-spouse handled his relationships with his parents was none of my business. I spoke to her, but he did not. To her, this was akin to him being dead. When my own father died, she also said she hoped he suffered before he died, as he didn't seem like a good man. I haven't spoken to her since that conversation in 2012. She is unwell. Story 12. I had a coworker who laughed about a local student who was cyberbullied to the point of suicide. They said, "Kids are too sensitive." Story 13. Carlos Danger, also known as Anthony Weiner, used the alias Carlos Danger when sending inappropriate pictures to random women and a 15-year-old girl while he was married and serving in Congress. I had a job interview with him before he resigned. The interview was filled with manipulative behavior and petty power plays to test my tolerance. Felt like being a mouse trapped with a snake. I began subtly challenging him to show that I was neither intimidated nor impressed, and he immediately ended the interview. Story 14. Had an awful boss. She was a straight-up weirdo, condescending, textbook gaslighter. One day, mid-workday, everyone received an email that she had been fired. It was one of the best days I have ever had at work. Story 15. I met and spoke with a man who was a sex offender with an incest conviction and later committed murder. My friend says the scariest person she ever met was a Russian oligarch, and she has also met Jeffrey Dahmer. She grew up in Milwaukee and met Dahmer a couple of times as a child. The oligarch scared her more than Dahmer because of the pure malevolence coming from him. She did not tell me his name, though. Story 16. When I was in high school, I went to a classmate's house to work on a project and met his family, including his older brother. A few months later, the older brother slaughtered the entire family in their sleep and set the house on fire to hide the evidence. That objectively makes him an awful person. For those curious, he never stated a motive. His testimony about how he entered my classmate's room and began stabbing him as he was waking up sent chills through me. May he rot in prison. Story 17. Smartest person in my corporation. We shared an account and attended a few client meetings together. He is a sociopath, completely unbalanced. He betrayed me and went on to do the same to 10 more people. He is no longer with the company. Competitors will not hire him because they are aware. I am waiting for the day he makes the news. Story 18. The man we eventually discovered was abusing his own daughters and later tried to sue them for defamation when they came forward. Story 19. O.J. Simpson in the 1970s when he played for the Buffalo Bills. I sold him marijuana, and he tried to take advantage of me. He was married and a truly unpleasant person. Story 20. I had a coworker who was always just a little off. She always said the right things and stayed far enough from controversy to get all the details while conveniently staying out of it. I wasn't really close to any of my coworkers, but she had a habit of circling my work area when she needed a break. One day during a training day with less to do, she walked over to me while I worked to talk about her daughter and how she came to be. Apparently, she had a huge crush on a guy in college. She kept describing him as model hot, but he didn't like her back at all. However, she was friendly enough with him to get him to still hang out with her. She invited him to someone else's party, offering him a drink when he arrived. Apparently, she slipped something in his drink. She then led him to her bedroom and forced herself on him. According to her, the guy was horrified, having only vague memories of what happened, but waking up with her there to happily admit what she had done. He went to the school to report her, but the school and the state did not take female-on-male cases seriously. The school and the state only recognized victims if they had been penetrated. She, however, upon hearing that he had ratted on her, went to the school crying and claiming he had actually been the one to force himself on her. The school took immediate action. She said they offered her a hotel room away from campus to recuperate, gave her accommodations while they investigated, and she received tons of sympathy from classmates. The boy she accused was taken out of classes until the investigation was finished. He was not allowed on campus unless specifically invited to sign forms or give a statement, and was hated by everyone who heard what he was accused of. The school apparently had a kind of college trial separate from an actual state trial, where he was assumed guilty and had to prove his innocence. He couldn't, as it is hard to prove a negative, so he was expelled. The best they could do for him was acknowledge they had evidence he had been drugged, and she admitted to at least that much, so she got a suspension. According to her, this was the school going light on her because she had been victimized. She went on to finish college. She didn't remember what happened to the guy because he blocked her as soon as he was expelled. But she did note that her child resulted from her plan, and that the daughter looked just like the guy, which she described as a bonus. She talked about the whole thing as if it were some kind of accomplishment. Then, and this actually made me a little sick, she spoke about making a new Facebook account to get around him blocking her so she could find the guy, tell him he had a daughter, apparently she never told him, and force him to pay back child support. She ended her little story, which only took a few minutes to tell, with, "This is why no one messes with me. I get what I want." She told that whole story without an ounce of remorse. She couldn't take no for an answer, forced herself on a guy, lied and blamed him for it, which got him expelled, secretly had his baby, and planned on suing him for 18 years of child support. So, yeah, the absolute worst person I have ever met in person. Luckily, she quit after some argument with our boss, so I never saw her again. Story 21. Probably Henry Kissinger. I have met a fair number of infamous people, but I do not think anyone has his body count. Story 22. One of my former coworkers. Apart from being a horrible worker, lying about being a disabled veteran, lying about where he graduated from, making enemies of the sandwich shop employees, being a manipulative and controlling spouse, killing his service animal, and being unwilling and unable to take responsibility for any action whatsoever, he is also actually a Nazi. Story 23. A very successful hedge fund manager. I used to do survival sex work, and he was briefly one of my clients. I met him to discuss things before going to the bedroom, and he spent half the time complaining about minimum wage workers fighting to get $15 per hour. Once we went back to one of his two ski homes in the city, he gave me alcohol. The whole sexual encounter was quick, thankfully. Then he sent me on my way home down the mountain, almost blackout drunk. It was not his responsibility to stop me from driving, but he certainly did not try. I was definitely at fault for driving home that day. Why is he the worst person I have ever met? He just was. It is something I unfortunately can't put into words well. It was like I looked true evil in the eyes and then got paid to have sex with it. It was bone-chilling. Also, he paid me through PayPal and said it was for personal training services so that he could claim it as a health expense on his taxes, according to him. I am grateful now to be in a position where I will never have to do sex work again and am finally getting sober. Story 24. The mother of one of my former high school students. Before her, I really did not think people acted like two-faced soap opera characters. Story 25. This classmate in the history of economics back in college bragged about a new car he did not have yet. He did not want to settle for a BMW like his parents were supposedly going to buy him. He wanted a Porsche. Sneered at the idea of taking a calculus class at a local community college, which was common advice because the math program there was poor. Specifically, he thought people who attended community college, professors included, were somehow lesser, and that was why they were there instead of the university. Nearly lost his temper when someone suggested he use the free commuter buses the university provided so students could get around. He did not want to be on a bus with those people. When our economics class started its module on socialism, the professor began by playing a classic French piece about workers' rights and better pay. He made it his mission to talk and make as much noise as possible so the people around him could not hear it. Story 26. Well, it pains me to say, but my brother and I used to be like twins, so close. Then he turned into an alcoholic, abusing my grandmother and animals. He tried to choke her to death. He can rot in hell for all I care. I definitely miss the old him. It makes me really sad, so I try not to think about it. It is crazy how people can change. Story 27. That is a hard one, but the person who comes to mind is my graduate school advisor who manipulated me out of the program in the middle of COVID-19 by telling me the department hated me. I had called her asking for an additional semester to finish my thesis, which, as you can imagine, was very common during COVID-19 due to the libraries and archives being closed indefinitely. I was stuck halfway across the country from the university. She had told me to communicate openly with her and that she would help. So I told her I was struggling with my mental health and my thesis and needed more time. Instead, that call led to me leaving the program, losing my job and my health insurance. I had a mental breakdown a week later. I ran into the department chair a few years later, and it turned out that she had made up the whole "you are burning bridges in the department and need to take leave before you ruin your career" story. Something about tough love. Truly, from the bottom of my heart, I strongly condemn that woman. Story 28. My grandmother was an abusive alcoholic who physically and mentally abused my mother and my uncle when they were children, and later on me. Everyone in my family cut her off when she refused to quit drinking and get help. Ironically, she told my mother she was dying of cancer so she could have a free place to live for a decade. What ended up killing her was cancer, specifically related to alcohol abuse, a decade after my mother kicked her out. Karma is real. Story 29. My mother taught elementary school. I cannot say for sure if she harmed any students, but she harmed me and definitely had access. She would take her favorite students on outings to the movies and dinner with their parents' permission. Most of these children were young boys from immigrant families who were in her English as a second language class. Story 30. My husband's former boss poached him from a different company, making the job seem amazing and promising things he had no intention of keeping, such as, "You'll be able to be home with your family whenever you need to be." I was expecting at the time, and he knew it. There will be so much opportunity for commission. And this is a small company, so we don't have corporate insurance, but pick out your own and I'll pay for it. As it turned out, my husband was traveling to the next state over and would be gone Sunday night through Saturday morning every week. I was home alone, wondering how we would manage everything once our baby arrived. Insurance was never paid for, despite the promise. Soon after, my younger brother unexpectedly passed away. It was absolutely horrific, and my husband was over 400 miles away. He begged his boss to come home for the week to be with my family and attend the funeral. His boss seemed sympathetic and told him to take all the time he needed, but he only took 5 days off. Immediately upon returning to work, his boss became incredibly critical of my husband, who had only been there a few months and had very little support. Although he never outright said it was because my husband took time off for a family funeral, he alluded to it multiple times. We now know he was nitpicking on purpose to find a reason to fire my husband. He ended up firing my husband in front of the whole company, going as far as throwing all of his personal belongings from the work vehicle onto the pavement and telling him to find his own way home, despite us living miles away in the middle of August. As horrible as this was, the worst part was he didn't pay my husband any of his earned commission. Commission was his main form of income and would have been around $20,000 pre-tax. We now know this is his tactic. Find and lure good salesmen, then find any reason to fire them during their probation to keep all the money earned. I ended up miscarrying our baby after years of infertility treatments, and I believe this situation was a contributing factor. This was genuinely the worst time in our lives, and he made it so much worse. I am deeply angry at Tim. Story 31. Customer at a store where I worked in my 20s. Large and vigorous woman in her 60s. loudly proclaimed herself a Christian and touted all the religious virtues she had. Taught Sunday school. The meanest, cruelest, most vile woman I ever met. Had to have a staff member wait on her when she shopped, carrying her basket and pulling products off the shelves for her. Accompanied by a constant flood of denigration, abuse, and backhanded compliments the entire time. She could walk and use her limbs just fine, but she spent enough that our boss told us to do it and accept it. Reduced a truly sweet coworker to tears every chance she got. One day, the coworker broke down completely, crying that it was so unfair her wonderful grandmother had Alzheimer's and was dying while this woman continued to walk the world. Story 32. Pete Rose. The guy was a complete scumbag. This was around 1992 or so. Actually, does Donald Rumsfeld count? He came out to our forward operating base in May or June of 2003. Condescending jerk. Story 33. Father-in-law who is not my wife's father but rather her uncle. He will not address me as the father of my son, only says he's here. Will not look me in the eye or shake my hand unless I approach first, and only sees my wife as a daughter when it is convenient for him. My only fault? Honestly, putting him and his family, excluding my wife, on blast for putting my wife and me in a financial crisis. I am treated like an outsider because I do not fall in line with his vision. All of that is acceptable except my wife gets upset when I do not acknowledge him, and I love that woman beyond words. So to make my marriage work, I have to endure hardship while he is treated well. Also, I have a strong gut feeling he may have molested my wife when she was a child because she says she has no real recollection of her childhood until 7th grade. That is a major red flag for me. Sorry for the rant, but this post just stirred up a lot of emotions. Story 34. This man in his late 40s was the self-employed landlord of the childhood home where he grew up. He appeared to be under the influence of drugs and was recently arrested for a sexual offense. Story 35. Guy in undergrad who was very popular for nothing. He bragged about kicking a girl he got pregnant down the stairs. Just an overall terrible person, and this is coming from someone who is not great. The only standout in my group of people I disliked. Story 36. My former team leader who stalked me, lied about me constantly, caused me to be banned from our office based on falsehoods, and pushed me into suicidal thoughts. Story 37. My old friend Jordan was boy-obsessed and would shame me in front of guys she was flirting with. She would offer to take me out and pay, loudly talking about how she was paying in the restaurant. She insulted me in front of people and was selfish and rude. She never let me share anything about myself and would overpower any conversation. I parted ways with her respectfully. She reappeared a month ago and cornered me in a bar to apologize. She went on and on about how sorry she was, and when I tried to say anything, she would say, "I just want to say this. You might think she changed a little, but I decided to go out with her recently, and she did the same exact things she used to do, including ditching me to go with a guy. She FaceTimed me out of the blue to ask about my ex-boyfriend and to check up on me days after she ditched me, then proceeded to talk about her boy problems. I ghosted her and never looked back. My kindest friends said how badly she treated me when I introduced her to my group. I don't know how anyone can truly be in her presence without wanting to gouge their eyes out." Story 38. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and some other founding fathers of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. I worked as a medic at the compounds and in the hospital at Camp Bucca from June 2005 to June 2006. I ensured those individuals took their blood pressure medication and received proper Western medicine. You are welcome. Story 39. I work at a hospital. There is a maximum security prison in the county north of us, so we receive some of their inmates, especially when they injure each other with stabbing. The guards provide us with a sheet containing basic information such as name, social security number, and date of birth. It often also includes their offenses and gang affiliations. It is common to have gang members with violent offenses, including murder and rape. What is surprising is that they are typically incredibly polite. It is actually somewhat unnerving. Story 40. Someone named Crispin Abria was obsessed and thinks that having cancer is funny. He also used to fantasize about rape jokes. It is unpleasant sharing the same air with him. Story 41. My grandmother on my father's side was a mean, cranky woman who treated my mother poorly for 40 years. Story 42. My son's mother's father was an absolute degenerate and alcoholic. He was a severe gambler. Every Christmas, he would steal all of his wife's money and lose it at the casino. Christmas was very sad for all the children. It was like the show Shameless, except no one looked out for each other and there were no heartwarming moments, just one catastrophe after another. It was the most heartbreaking situation I had ever seen. I am so glad I got full custody. Story 43. Brenda B. is the worst person I have ever met. She lives in the United States, is an immigrant, has 4 children, 2 of whom are here illegally, and none speak to her. She has had 3 or 4 husbands and had her first child at 14. She committed Medicaid fraud amounting to $1.3 million and is proud of it. She is a racist and shows intense hatred toward anyone unlike herself. She speaks badly about everyone who turns their back on her, believes bullying is acceptable and yells, "I have no empathy." When someone who donated to her children's fundraiser, which she used for cosmetic surgery and a new trailer since Medicaid covered the cost, asked her to donate for an accident fundraiser. She takes pride in the animals she has cycled through and killed when finished with them. She is a Nazi and has denied slavery and the Holocaust, claiming that white men are the most discriminated against people in history. She says all this with a straight face. After hearing this, I decided to resign. Story 44. I worked for Jeep Chrysler, and there was a general manager who was an awful person. He would illegally finance handicap-accessible vans for people in town and immediately get his picture taken with them for the paper. He knew they would be repossessed sooner or later, but he would be long gone by then. He used the Chrysler credit card to take his wife to Beverly Hills for weekend shopping sprees. Later, we found out he spent $350 on a pair of socks, $2,500 on Gucci loafers and a Gucci belt, plus thousands on his wife's personal items. He smoked 3 packs a day and never ate a fruit or vegetable. When everything collapsed at his dealership, he wiped snot on the door handles before the police and financial investigators arrived. He was the epitome of a terrible car salesman. Scum with zero scruples who ripped off his own family without remorse. He ended up having a fatal heart event after using a large amount of fentanyl-laced cocaine. A fitting end to the worst person I have ever encountered. Story 45. Red Simons, guitarist for the Australian band Skyhooks long ago, was also on the television show Hey Hey It's Saturday for years. Rudest person I ever met. Story 46. My grandmother misspelled my name my whole life on purpose. If I sat at the piano, she would tell me not to play and call my cousin, who was 10 days younger, over to play. I was by far the better pianist. She would make cookies for the cousins when we all visited and would walk around serving them. But when she got to me, she would tell me I was too fat and could not have any. For our 16th birthdays, she gave my cousin a car. She gave me a plastic accordion folded rain bonnet like they used to sell in fish bowls at the drugstore counter. It still had the 25-cent price tag on it. When she passed away, she left me a bowl but not the sapphire ring she had repeatedly told me she wanted me to have. By then, my cousin had married a Baptist preacher at 18 years old. She left her $60,000. My grandmother was a real piece of work. Fortunately, she lived in another state, so I did not have to experience her rejection more than once or twice a year. Story 47. My wife is the most evil, gross human I have ever met. A few months ago, she said my grandmother needed to just die already so we could inherit some money. Now that my grandmother has died, she is over the moon excited about all the money we will be getting. I am sick. I just want to give up, throw up, and walk away from everything that has to do with her and her evil greed. Yes, my grandmother left me some money. It is not much and I really do not want it. I would rather have both my grandparents alive. The money has no value to me. I hope when her parents leave us, they leave her nothing because she will blow every penny she gets and have nothing to show for it. She is the most diabolic person I know. Story 48. Roommate's ex. She was living under a fake name and had created an entire false backstory for herself. She even claimed she was sprinkling her deceased mother's ashes in a lake once and said she had murdered someone in Louisiana as a child. among many other fabricated stories. In reality, she had never lived in Louisiana, and her mother was alive and well. Story 49. My friend's father used to beat his 2 children and wife regularly. He was an addict and a bad person. One day, he hit his older son. So the younger son grabbed a knife to try to help his brother. A neighbor called the police, which was very rare in this neighborhood because no one usually called the police, but they were really loud. He took the knife from his son, charged at a police officer with it, and was shot dead by the police. The strange thing is he was always nice to me. When I was attacked, he made calls to find out who did it. I know people who have killed others, but they were not bad people, just people who chose a difficult lifestyle. Story 50. This was not me, but a recently deceased friend. In the 1970s, purely by chance, he met 2 serial killers, Ted Bundy and Kenneth Bianchi, one half of the Hillside Strangler duo. My friend was a student at the University of Washington in Seattle in 1974. He was having a meal in a university district restaurant when his ex-girlfriend's female friend arrived with a man he did not recognize. She stopped by his table and introduced her date, Ted Bundy. She later became a victim. The next summer, around 1975, my friend worked in a boatyard in Bellingham, Washington. He would cash his weekly paychecks at the photo department of a local drugstore chain that also offered check cashing services, possibly Pay and Save. The manager of the photo department was Kenneth Bianchi. Hearing his story still sends chills down my spine. What are the odds that a person would encounter 2 serial killers in the course of their life? Story 51. Des Bishop. My wife was obsessed with him. We went to one of his shows and afterward bumped into him in the lobby. He was so rude to her she never listened to him again, which was a big win for me. Thanks, Des. Story 52. I had a coworker last year who was the worst person I have ever had to work with. I had never done landscaping or yard work before. I live in a small town in the Four Corners region. I had known this guy since high school and never really liked him. In high school, it was obvious that he was not very bright. All he ever talked about was sex, the gym, and his bodily functions. He was very arrogant, walked with a swagger, and had an obnoxious smirk. He was always self-obsessed and felt superior. While he was not my favorite person then, it was not until I worked with him that I really started to dislike him. I told him I was living in a city near the Navajo Nation, and the first thing he said was that he did not like going there because he did not like Native Americans. This was ironic to me because he was from Mexico, specifically Chihuahua, and had very dark skin. I told him during one of his racist rants that he probably did have some indigenous heritage with skin that dark from Mexico, and he said, "No, I don't. I'm Mexican." One of my close friends, who is an actual Native American, recently told me all the offensive names he used to call him, like Geronimo, and how he said Native Americans are lazy, inbred, and live off welfare. My friend is a very nice guy, about twice his size, but very timid and would not hurt a fly. This coworker also hit on his sister before. I also do not think he really liked black people either. Literally all he talked about was sex, farting, how lazy everyone was, and how he was the only one who worked hard. To make it worse, he had an obnoxious high-pitched voice. He told the boss repeatedly that I was having a hard time, trying to get me fired. I had a water bottle that leaked over my backpack, and he told her I was drunk on the job. I have never been drunk in my life and would never drink on a job site. He also repeatedly went to my other job at a grocery store and hit on a 16-year-old girl who worked as a bagger. After I told him her age, he did not care and repeatedly called her hot until I told the manager. He would order me around, clap his hands at me, and smirk while doing so. I was not even that slow after the first 2 weeks and worked as fast as everyone else. I am not one to talk back, so I just looked at him and went as slow as a turtle. The boss was a very kind lady who saw the good in everyone and was nice to both of us. But I quit because I could not stand him. Simply seeing him at the grocery store makes me viscerally angry, and I move out of the way or find something else to do to avoid interacting with him. Story 53. Tucker Carlson's father, Dick, was insufferable. Arrogant, rude, racist, and misogynistic. His business partner for the project was also a right-wing extremist, but at least he was polite. Story 54. I have met Derek Chauvin. In my humble opinion, he is a common narcissist, but I did not get a racist vibe from him. Story 55. I went to graduate school with a man who was not very bright. I never liked him much because he did not put in much effort and was not very smart, but he chose an advisor known for helping students complete the program, so he earned his Doctor of Philosophy in mathematics without learning much. A few years ago, I found out he is serving a life sentence in prison for sexually abusing his 8-year-old adopted daughter. This put the negative feelings I had about him coasting through the program into perspective. He was a very naive Christian who believed he witnessed a man regrow a leg during prayer at work. I always saw him as extremely naive but never would have guessed he was truly a villain. Story 56. This ex-friend in college constantly tried starting fights in the main lounge for no reason, even going as far as to use a racial slur to instigate. He tried ruining our friend group trip by being a complete brat about sleeping arrangements we had already agreed upon, food, and never paying anyone back. He blocked us socially, supposedly ironically, whatever that means. He threatened to kill himself on multiple occasions over trivial matters. For example, we all went to lunch between classes, but he had a class at that time and wasn't caught in the group. Therefore, we were considered the bad guys, and he said he was going to throw himself off the parking garage. After about the 8th threat, we no longer had the energy to care, and he sent us all death threats and messages like, "Your life will amount to nothing." The biggest issue: he sexually assaulted a girl who stopped showing up because she didn't know how to process the incident. She is fine now. When we asked for his side of the story, he said that because he is autistic and has Asperger's syndrome, we cannot hold him responsible because that would make us discriminatory. That entire incident caused massive rifts in the friend group, and none of us talked to him to this day. We were all about 19 to 20 years old at the time. Story 57. My older brother. I do not believe in the concept of pure evil. I think the world is too gray for outright pure evil to exist. However, the closest I have ever encountered is him. He mentally and physically tortured me from when I was 4 to 13. Some of his worst actions included sexually assaulting me so violently he ruptured my colon. When he saw the blood and I begged him to stop, offering to do anything just to end the pain, he refused because the blood acted as lubrication and made it feel better for him. He continued until he finished, despite my screaming and crying, and kept punching me in the face to silence me. He would frequently sneak into my room in the middle of the night, jump on me, pin my head down while covering my mouth, and hold a knife to my throat, sometimes slicing slightly enough to draw blood but not cause permanent damage. He told me he was doing this to show he could get to me anytime, anywhere, that I was never safe, and that he could kill me whenever he wanted. He said I was alive only because he allowed it, and if I did not comply, he would end me. He convinced me I was the reason my mother became an addict and why our family suffered so much fighting and turmoil, among other distressing things for a child to hear. At one point, he told me he was intentionally brutal during his assaults because he liked it more when I cried. The only reason it stopped was that I grew big and strong enough, and with enough martial arts training, when he tried to assault me again, I was able to defend myself and make it clear I was no longer his plaything. He is a deranged, violently mentally ill person who literally gets pleasure from suffering. He is one of the few individuals I have ever encountered with absolutely no redeeming qualities and, as I said, is as close to pure evil as I have ever seen. Story 58. One of the founders of the Portland Queer Arts Foundation has a serious illegal substance abuse problem, is a self-described sex addict, and a pathological liar. He twice set me up to be sexually assaulted and possibly abducted. At one point, he walked in on me literally fighting off my attacker, made eye contact with me as I pleaded for help, then turned around and walked out, shutting the door behind him. When I fought my attacker off and ran to him for help, begging him to take me home, he gave me his keys to sit in his car, and I waited 3 hours while he and my attempted rapist just hung out. Afterwards, he became furious at my attempts to bring up what had just happened or ask how he obviously knew the stranger that we had just crossed paths with multiple times. He dismissed me by laughing and saying it was not a real assault and that I was being disrespectful to real victims. Around 2020, he was dating a 17-year-old while he was 31 or 32. He literally trafficked the kid, admitting to me that he arranged sexual encounters with other adults for both of them and offered unprompted to prostitute the kid for cash if it seemed like a fun, sexy thing to do. This was at least his second ongoing statutory rape situation in a handful of years, as he casually described repeatedly hooking up with, supplying hard drugs to, and using the same drugs with a 15-year-old while he was around 29. I kicked him out of my house where he had been staying for a few months in my guest room. He apparently disappeared to Mexico for a time, becoming a massage therapist. Recently, I randomly recognized him in a picture going by a different last name and having co-founded an organization that funnels vulnerable gay youth directly to him, which is baffling to me given that he was unemployed, broke with no savings, and fleeing the country the last time I saw or heard from him. Besides everything else that keeps me awake at night about him, I wonder what sort of scam he is pulling this time and on whom. He is a predator, and not just sexually. He hides behind an illusion of Buddhism, faux spirituality. You can always count on him to suddenly need to meditate in the most visible location available, and therapist's terminology. But there is nothing benevolent or healthy about the way he conducts himself or treats others. Quite the opposite. He has described himself as someone who loves misery and loves to see just how far he can push people and how much he can get away with. I have made dozens of anonymous reports over the last few years and contacted Portland news media and lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender organizations, but I have received not even a single response or follow-up. Story 59. My manager and senior manager years ago. My wife was dying of cancer, and they did not want to let me take her to chemotherapy. One was fired and the other was demoted. Karma is a bitch. Story 60. A manager I once had was nice to everyone except me. She used things I told her in confidence against me, wrote me up for not doing tasks she never trained me to do, and told me I could have certain days off to go away with my boyfriend, but then scheduled me to work on those days. My two other coworkers in the department thankfully did not dismiss what I told them about her treatment, but they did not share the same experience until I left. A little while after I quit, my two coworkers told my boyfriend she ended up doing the same things to them. She was eventually fired. Story 61. My ex's parents had serious issues. One used their culture to be emotionally abusive to his wife and was a raging sexist. The other was emotionally damaged from years of abuse and wanted her other child to attend conversion therapy after discovering he was gay. The blatant favoritism toward the eldest child and my boyfriend at the time was so intense and painful that I would often cry. Story 62. I had two friends who were close in high school. I think they both liked the same girl and didn't like that she hung out with me. I will never forget them spitting in my face at the same time when I was talking to a friend, hitting my car as a joke, making fun of my girlfriend at the time, constantly calling me gay because I wore tighter pants, and then finally starting a MySpace group called Better Than My Name, which included all of my so-called friends. I have one friend I grew up with who I still talk to, and they are very cool. Not to brag, but I started a business for myself 3 years after they created that MySpace group, and I have made significantly more money than they ever did, along with a good number of friends who are unique like me and like me for who I am. Those individuals can go away. I ran into them about 18 years ago, and they refused to look me in the eyes while I simply stared at them. So yes, I win DJ and Sean. Story 63. The man who convinced me to go to law school was one of the founding partners of Prenda Law. He is currently serving time in a federal prison. Story 64. Might be William Shatner. Total inappropriate behavior. Cared about nothing but talking to young women. Never meet your heroes. Story 65. Rolf Harris bought a pair of trousers for me when I worked at Harrods. He was quite overweight with a waist measuring 46 inches, and he was not very tall. Story 66. There was a student in high school who was the most disturbing and troubled individual I have ever had the misfortune of knowing. He threatened to shoot up the school in a Snapchat post. The headmaster announced over the intercom the next day that he was suspended indefinitely. The student was sent to a psychiatric ward. Rumor has it his parents threatened to sue the school. Our high school was $2 million in debt due to an accounting error. So even though the case would likely have been won by the district, they could not afford a lawyer to fight it. During this time, I learned that he had assaulted one of my classmates. Apparently, he was allowed to attend the mandatory administration of the SATs, where we all crowded into the gymnasium. One of my friends had a panic attack because it felt like the perfect place for a shooting, and I was also nervous because he sat behind me. Then one day, I walked into honors government class and he was sitting right next to his victim. A few weeks later, she confided that he had sent her a Snapchat message telling her not to come to school that day, with a picture of a gun. I told a guidance counselor, but because I refused to give up the victim's name, she did nothing. He remained in school. The day before graduation, he was finally arrested for 9 counts of sexual assault. Instead of trying him as an adult when he was 17, which was an option in my state, they waited until he was officially 18, along with many other victims. He only served a short time. When he got out, he violated parole by pretending to be a child on social media in order to groom girls. According to my sources, he assaulted at least one more person. It took until he and his friend uploaded a video where they mentioned their names and that they liked assaulting women before the police took action. He was released again and continued his behavior. He is a serial child predator who nearly shot up my school and got away with it. That is the worst person I have ever met. But the adults in the administration and justice system who allowed it to continue are also deeply responsible. Story 67. Recently, my former boss of 3 to 4 years created chaos in the department. He would figuratively breathe down your neck and sneak behind you to see what you were doing on the computer. Once, I introduced myself to the vice president and took offense to it. He said I was not being a team player and threatened to block me from any job prospects. I believe he did this alongside his associates. As luck would have it, this man disappeared. He was on medical leave for a while and then never returned. I thought it was karma. I am trying to be a better person, but just thinking about him makes me feel dark. He likely caused 2 years of lost growth in my job and the financial impact of that. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.